What's happening out there, model makers? I am sitting here on a Saturday afternoon, and my round robin of projects has led me back around to working on the Dragon 132nd Bf-109E-4B. And if you've been keeping up with the last two episodes, you know that the last thing that I got to was buttoning up the cockpit and contemplating how I could get away with painting it. It was just too hard to resist, and I did, in fact, give in to the temptation. You can see that the cockpit fuselage, that whole section is all together, and you can see a little bit inside there that's all got some paint on it. I'll throw a photograph up there too. But that's not what this is really about. As you know, this is a construction review of this kit, and the intent is to build the whole thing unaffected by paint. Now, the reason that I went ahead and painted the cockpit was because the whole assembly was all done, 100% of it. So I set out to do what, I did what I set out to do with that in showing the fit and the engineering and so forth, without affecting any of it with paint. So I'm still on safe ground with that. And what I'm going to tackle this time is steps 5 and 6 of the instruction sheet, which gets us an engine all assembled and ready to mount up. Actually, it's 5, 6, and 7. I had hoped to get a little further along with this episode, but as you'll see, I ran into at least a couple of challenges. So let's find out what those were. Okay, so where we left off last time was that I had the cockpit all assembled and that I was threatening to paint it. And as you can see, I have in fact carried through with that threat. I couldn't resist. And so it is all done and all installed. You can see inside the fuselage there, and all of this went together just perfectly. The fit of this cockpit subassembly with the fuselage sidewalls is a little bit tight. If you want to make it easier on yourself, what you can do is open up those slots just a tiny bit, but otherwise it all goes together pretty well. Make sure you have the tab on the back edge of this plate on the correct side of the fuselage wall here. But other than that, there's really no issue. This fuselage fits together really well, and you can see how perfectly the panel lines line up across the joint there. And this piece just drops right in afterwards. So no issues there. And now I am ready to start with engine assembly. And what I've done is I've got all of the parts clipped off the sprues and laid out here in little piles from sprues E, A, B, and J, and a little pile of ejector pin pads just because it was fun and I wanted to see how large that pile would be. You'll get tired of clipping these things off, but as I've said before, you'll get a lot less tired of that than you will of dealing with ejector pin witness marks on areas that you would have difficulty dealing with them in. So don't look a gift horse in the mouth on that deal. Okay, so instruction sheet wise, what I'm going to be tackling is steps 5 and 6, which is pretty complicated little group of parts, not quite as gnarly as the cockpit was, but should be entertaining. Okay, just a word of caution here. There are, some tiny little parts right here. Parts J1, there's 4 of them. They go on each corner of the engine block. And just a word of warning so that you don't do what I did. When you're clipping them off the sprue, be very careful because you have to clip an ejector pad off the end of each one before you clip them off of the gate. And it's real easy to do what I did and clip a little too much. I got lazy and didn't put my optivisor on, and so just be careful of that. The good news is I can hide that one behind the Supercharger, and no one will probably be able to see it. Okay, now here's a little tip. The stub that fits inside the hole on the back side of this part right here was a little too large, and it would not go on dry. Now, before I got all excited about it and started, trying to make the hole larger or make the stub smaller, I took a close look at it and saw that it was really close, kind of probably a line-to-line fit. And I know from experience that you can use Tamiya Extra Thin as a sort of a lubricant for a tight fit like that, because it'll actually melt the plastic a little bit on both surfaces and allow them to slide together where they wouldn't otherwise go together dry if they were trying to go together dry. So you can save yourself a little bit of pain and anguish of trying to modify those parts before you squeeze them together. Okay, I've zoomed in here so that I can talk about a couple of things that I think are both cool and challenging. I got to say that overall, the level of engineering on this motor is just really pretty impressive. I mean, almost without exception, everything goes where it's supposed to, almost effortlessly. There's a couple of fits that are tight, and there's a couple of places where you can put parts on the wrong direction, but overall, it's really, really pretty impressive. Now, one thing that is something to take note of if it's important to you like it is to me is these valve cover vents right here. Okay, they don't show you this really in the instructions, but where they're supposed to plug into the valve covers is right there, and there's a little bit of a landing pad for it, but it's not super obvious, and so you just have to take note of that. And it's a little bit of a wrestling match to get the tips of these hoses to plug in or to secure to that spot, because there's nothing there to hold them in place. So you got to use some super glue and a little bit of patience to get them in exactly the right spot. But if you don't want to fight that battle, it's not a huge deal because, again, remember, this motor is an inverted V12, and it's going to be pretty difficult for anybody to see that, if those are not in exactly the right spot. Same thing here, where these, where the end of the valve cover mates with this part right here, you get a little bit of a gap, and I just filled that with super glue. Not a big deal, and again, probably won't even show, but it's something to take note of. Also, over here on the other side, you've got this oil line where it plugs in right here. Not a perfect mate with the cutout in the side of this part, so you get a little bit of a gap right there. But again, just a little bit of super glue fills that up. Not a big deal at all. One place where I'd like to see a tighter fit is on this shaft right here. It's loose enough that it's not guaranteed to be coming out of the engine block at right angles. So just take some care to eyeball it and make sure that it is in fact straight before you let the glue set up. Okay, here's an important point about some extra parts. Okay, if you look in the instructions right here, you can see that part number B19 is going to go up underneath the bottom of the engine block. And when you are cutting everything off of the sprue, you may notice that you get two parts that look like B19, and one of them doesn't have these mounting tabs on the sides and is a little bit different, and they don't really say anything about this one. So just something to take note of so that you don't get those confused. but B19 is definitely the one that you want. Okay, now you're going to notice that I just veered off of the instruction sheet, and let me show you what I mean and explain why I'm doing that, and maybe stop bumping into the camera. Okay, right here they want you to assemble part number B19, which is the intake manifold, to all of these other parts right here. Now if you look over here, you're going to see where that entire subassembly attaches to the bottom of the engine block, like I was saying a second ago. Now, what you need to take a note of that they don't show you in the instructions is that there's a coupling between the manifold and the supercharger plumbing. Okay, and you can see where I've assembled that there's a little bit of a gap. Now, I've gone back and added a little bit of extra thin to this part to loosen it up a little bit, so that now I can push those together and get those to mate. Now, that's not super important because that joint is on the bottom and you're probably not going to see a whole lot of it. So if you don't get it to completely mate up perfectly, it's not the end of the world. But here's where it has a multiplier effect. Okay, if you look on the back side of the supercharger, you can see that there's a couple of, let me adjust the light a little bit so that we can see that better. Okay, if you look back here, you'll see that there's a couple of holes. Okay, and one of those holes is to help you mount the end of this ignition plumbing thing right here that comes off the back of the coil. Okay, and let me show you where that goes on in the instructions. Okay, right here you can see part J20 plugs into the back of part J27, and you're going to add these two skinny little tubing type parts to the ends of it, and those are, man, I'm sorry, I keep bumping the camera. I've got my optivisor on and it's just right in the way. Those are these little parts right here, and what happens with them is that they are going to go from the end of this pipe right here down to the end of this ignition pipe right here. Okay, so you can see you've got to go from here to here, and then you've got to go from here underneath the supercharger plumbing over to this landing spot right here. So you've got a bunch of tolerances stacking up there with things that have to connect together. You know, if you get this a little bit out of whack, it's not going to connect to this, but it's also going to make it difficult to plug this in right here, and it's going to cause the coil to sit skewed. So what you've got to figure out is what your overall strategy is going to be. Because I'm doing all of this unpainted, I can assemble it all at once and take advantage of the fact that the glue is still a little bit soft, and I can move everything around sort of in unison to make all of these connections happen the way that I want them to. But if I were painting all of these parts separately, which frankly might have been my natural instinct, and then gluing them on, you can see where things could get a little bit challenging, especially because some of these tolerances are also pretty tight, like where this part goes on to the engine block. It's a real tight fit. So you know, you just have to decide what your plan of attack is going to be before you start cutting parts off of the sprue and gluing them on here, and how important it is to you that all of these mechanical connections actually, you know, are happening between these pieces. If that's not super important to you, if none of it's going to show, then don't worry about it. If it is going to show, or if you're just kind of a freak like that, like I am, then, you know, these are all things that you got to take into account. Okay, so here we go. I want to show you now the completion of what I was talking about in the last clip, and that's these, and that's all of this plumbing here. Okay, you can see right here this ignition tubing coming down the side there, and how that is all supposed to connect. And you can see the one on the other side there on the back of the supercharger, how it fits in there and wraps around to this side and connects right there. Okay, and you can see we didn't quite maintain the connection with this large piece of plumbing here on the bottom, but that's not a bad sacrifice, because if you care about that gap, that's fairly easy to fill that in with some super glue or some Mr. Surfacer 1000 or something, and make that look a little bit better if you're worried about it. You know, but it's going to be on the bottom and very difficult to see in the final assembly. But I got to say, you know, look, this is really impressive. I've done a lot of this kind of work at full scale, and, you know, trust me, if you've never worked on a full-size engine, you know, those things don't go together perfectly either. There's plenty of times, especially with plumbing like this, where you will find yourself, you know, pushing on stuff with a lever, or, you know, in extreme circumstances, pounding on something with a hammer or a block of wood to get, you know, things to go together the way that they're supposed to. So for these guys to be able to pull this off 32 times smaller and do such a good job of helping you make these connections like you've got with these, you know, with these ignition tubes, and how they, you know, connect so perfectly right there so that the angle makes it almost seamless, is really a super impressive bit of model kit engineering. And you know, I got to give them props for that. And this is why I'm so hard on these guys when they make stuff that doesn't fit, because this is a good example of what's possible, you know, when they really are, you know, on their game and, you know, doing a good job with the engineering. So, you know, to me, that's why I rag on some of these guys for parts that don't fit, because, you know, in my mind, when you can do something like this, there's really no excuse for it. Okay, now here we have one of those situations where you could put this part on in two different ways. If and one of them is obviously going to be wrong if you are not paying attention. And they don't do a great job of showing you in the instructions how it's supposed to go. So what you want to make sure of is that this notch right here is on the same end of the engine block as this assembly is, and you'll be fine. Again, another situation with a part that can go on two different ways. This plate right here needs to be on so that this boss is on the end of the block opposite from this assembly. So it shows that pretty well in the instructions. Just make sure that you're paying attention when you do it. Well, here we go again with me being dyslexic and parts that can go on one of two ways. These little things that I was talking about earlier actually are supposed to be pointed in the other direction. And I just discovered that because with it in the wrong direction, it creates an interference with this hose right here. So the good news is that they are not fully cured up, and I can still turn them around the other way. And that one honestly is just on me, because it shows in the instructions pretty clearly which direction faces up. And here we have come to another point in the instruction sheet where we have an option that has no no meaning as far as I can tell. And that's right here with parts B6 and B7. They tell you can use either one, but they don't tell you why. And I can't find anything in the instructions later on that would cause me to think that one should be used over the other. So once again, that's going to be a matter of flipping a coin. And you can see the actual parts I've got laid out right here. These are the two in question, and they're not a whole lot different. It's a mystery to me as to which one you're supposed to use. In fact, it almost looks like what they're giving you is you can either use this, which is got these flaps on the side, or you can assemble these two pieces together like so and use them. So again, I'm not sure why you're supposed to pick one option over the other. Like I said, I will just flip a coin. Going back to some other optional parts that I was talking about earlier, not necessarily optional, but parts where you had a duplicate or an almost duplicate, and I was specifically talking about this one and this part, number B19, that goes on the bottom of the engine intake manifold. Actually, I went back and looked at the sprue map, and I'll show it to you here real quick. You can see right here on sprue J where that part comes from, that it's one of the ones highlighted in blue that you don't need to use. And that applies to everything in this little pile right here. So you've got some optional engine hangers, you've got this hose of some kind, you've got this manifold, you've got this optional coolant tank, and then you have this piece right here. And that piece right there, they say you don't need to use it, and I think that it's the answer to a question that I had. Hang on, right here. After doing all this assembly on the engine, you've got this little semicircular notch here, and they don't show anything in the instructions as being installed there. And I'm pretty sure that this is the piece that would go there on a different version of the aircraft. So I think that solves that mystery, and I will be able to sleep much better tonight. Yep, it's right there. Not sure what it's for or why you're supposed to discard it for this particular model of the aircraft, but hey, now I know the answer and I can sleep tonight. Okay, so I've gone ahead off camera and assembled the radiator and cooling hoses that attach to the bottom of the intake manifold right here. And one quick thing to say about that is this is again another spot, sorry if I sound like I'm repeating myself, where the installation is not a positive position. If you look right here, I've got these louvers on the intake and the outlet side, and they don't, they don't locate on anything. You're just left to assume how they should go. And so what I've done is just make the bottom edge flush on each part, and I'm hoping that that's correct. I mean, that's sort of the natural position that the intake side will adopt because of this thing right here. So anyway, hopefully that's correct. Speaking of the intake side, I think I went ahead and assembled the other option, other part, and I think that what they're doing is basically giving you the option of showing it with the intake louver in one of two positions that are possible, which is pretty cool. They should just sort of, I don't know, tell you that. That would be nice. But that is a minor offense compared to what I'm about to show you. I know I was going on and on earlier about how impressed I was with the engineering on this thing, and I am overall. I mean, don't misunderstand. I'm going to call these guys out on issues that I see, but you know, I'm also going to give credit where due. And they have done a mighty fine job of recreating this DB601 in all of its glory. But there's a couple of questions. Okay, if you look right here, there's this part, E6, that they show as having some pins on the back side of it and going here. But you don't see any locating holes in the picture. Same thing on this side. You've got this gizmo, B13, locating here on the side of the engine block, but again, no holes in the picture. And in fact, that's entirely accurate because there are no holes in the side of said DB601 engine block to accept the locating pins that are in fact on the back side of parts B13 and part number E6, as you can see here, if I can get it positioned. Yep, there you go, locating pins. So, you know, here's what I suspect is that they want you to be able to build this thing in a version that did not have either of those parts, which does seem to be a possibility. I spent a little time on the old interweb last night looking at pictures of Bf-109 power plants, and some of them have this tank. Maybe it's an oil tank, or I don't know what it is, but some of them have this on the left-hand side of the engine and some of them don't. All of the G models seem to have them on both sides. They do all seem to have this gizmo, whatever it is, on the right-hand side, however. So what I'm going to do is assume that they're correct in saying that both parts should be in place, and I'm going to drill some holes and install those because, hey, I'm following the instructions, and the instructions say that they're supposed to be there, but I'm not going to just stick them on there willy-nilly, you know, and hope that it's the right spot. So I will do my best to make sure that they do, in fact, end up where they're supposed to be. Now, one mystery that I brought up in the previous segment was this little gizmo here, and the fact that it plugs into this D-shaped notch right here. As I get to looking around, I also could see from pictures that what I think the story is there is that is the electric starter. I think early Bf-109s had a hand crank on the right-hand side, and I'm suspecting that that's, you know, that must be true of the E4, although I can't find anything that definitively supports that. So if any of you guys know, I'd be happy to learn that. It's not totally clear to me what the difference is between the E4 and the E3. You know, maybe that is one difference, that you know, you got electric start after that. I don't know. But again, I'm going to assume that Dragon is correct, and I am not going to install that thing, whatever it is. You know, one of my least favorite things in life is repeating myself, but apparently if I'm going to build and review Dragon kits on camera, I better get used to it, because you guessed it, here's another one of those spots. Okay, you've got this option here of either this little subassembly of B3 and B17, or what appears to me to be B3 and E10. What it actually is, and maybe I should have realized this immediately, if I were more of an expert on the Bf-109 I would have, it's actually either these two parts or this collection of 4 parts, E9, E11, E10, and B3. It's just two different versions of the air cleaner. And because this is a real hassle to deal with, I chose B17 because, well, it's B17 and we all love B17s, right? Plus, it's just a little more interesting looking in my opinion, so there it is. All neat and tidy on the side of the fuselage where it belongs. Alright, I am now officially a little bit annoyed. Let me explain why. Okay, you can see right here that in this very crowded section of the instructions, they want you to assemble exhaust manifold E28 with part A17, and that you're going to do a similar thing over here between E28 and A18. Seems straightforward enough. Obviously, we're going to have exhaust stacks poking through the sides of the fuselage at some point, right? But exactly how that's supposed to happen is a bit of a mystery. Okay, take a look here at part number A17. Okay, now, if you can see any locating features on that for those exhaust stacks, you have better eyes than I do. And when you put the two parts together and sort of try and figure it out, you can see that there are a whole bunch of ways for this to go wrong, even if you're not as clumsy as I am. I think it's safe to say that the end of the exhaust stack should probably line up with the end of this piece right here. And you can make a pretty good guess as to how far it's supposed to stick out. But again, it's guesswork. And look, Dragon, dudes, come on, guys. You can do better than this. This is a first-class model kit with incredible detail that should produce an incredible result. And guesswork should not be part of that equation, okay? It should be 100% clear because, look, that's probably the way that things are supposed to go right there, just like that. I think that's a pretty good bet. But do I want to bet the $50 that I spent on the kit and the hours and hours that I've invested of my time and my energy and my creativity to build it on, I guess that's the right position for it, especially on something that's such a focal point as the exhaust stacks on an aircraft are. I mean, look, I don't want to sound preachy here, but you guys have to understand, kit makers, and this is all of you, we don't just invest our $50, okay? We invest ourselves, and we do that with an idea that we're going to have a beautiful model when the process is all said and done. And we spend a lot of time thinking about how it's going to look, and none of us are interested in taking chances on the outcome. So, again, sorry if I sound preachy, but look, that's the deal. You've got to make it a lot more straightforward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the masking fluid that you guys have heard me mention several times before. And I'm going to experiment a little bit with finding the best way to assemble this so that it comes out right. The masking fluid is great because it's pretty sticky, but it totally peels off when you're done, and it will allow you to make some mistakes. So that's what I'm about to try and do. Okay, so here is how this is proceeding so far. What I did is I put the exhaust manifolds on the block on both sides. And there's a little bit of slop there between the pins and the holes that they go into. Not much, but what I would recommend you do is to make sure that they are as far back towards the rear of the engine as possible. It's not going to make a whole lot of difference, but I think it'll help a little bit. Anyway, after I got those on, I thought, okay, the next thing that's kind of an absolute is the connection between the filter inlet and the supercharger. So I went ahead and attached this piece, which is A17, to there, and you can see I've got it pretty well gooped up with masking fluid, but that's cool because it'll all come off. Any rate, what you'll see when you do that is that this part doesn't want to conform very well around the this tank here, and I think that it may be the culprit because I took the other side of the cowling, lower cowling, part number A18, and I put it on such that its back edge lined up with the back edge of its opposite half, and that's how I got the lateral positioning of it. And once I had it stuck on there pretty firmly, then I was able to squeeze the two parts together, and I've actually got this attached at the moment with a little bit of super glue. That's the only thing that was strong enough. And my theory is that I'm going to try and get this entire joint completely glued together. And with this little piece, this is, hang on a second here, this piece right here is part number B22, and it's what goes in this spot right here. And I feel pretty certain that once I get that in there and get it glued in with Tamiya extra thin, that that joint will be completely solid. And I believe, hopefully I'm not wrong about this, I believe that you will still be able to get this entire cowling section off of here at that point if you wanted to be able to pull it off and paint it. And that's the theory I'm working on. We'll see what happens next. Okay, here we are a few minutes later, and so far my master plan seems to be going okay. What I did is I put a little bit of super glue on both sides of this joint right here, and then I squeezed it together, and I had to squeeze pretty hard, but I squeezed it together with my thumbs, and in a classic model making sleight of hand, I then took a brush that I had already loaded up with accelerator and had already stuck between my teeth and just touched it off to the joint as I held it together, and lo and behold, it actually worked, and it held solid. So once I got past that, I took this small part, B22, and I pretty quickly found out that trying to set it in that hole was difficult because it wanted to just fall right through and disappear inside the cowl. So what I did is I just brushed a little bit of Tamiya extra thin around the edges, and to give it something, you know, tacky to hold on to, and then I dropped it in there with tweezers, and fortunately it fits perfectly. So it stayed put, and then I came back and brushed a little more Tamiya extra thin around the joint. And once that's cured up, this thing is going to be 100% solid, and I'll be able to find out whether or not it's possible to pull the whole thing off of there without screwing anything up. But I'm not going to test that theory until tomorrow morning. All right, well, good morning. It is daylight now, and I have completed the assembly of this nose section, and also added a couple of other parts just because I thought it would be a good idea to test fit some of the cowling pieces. And so let me show you what I have found. First is this this chin piece right here that goes on in step 7. I was actually pretty pleased with the way that it went on. Everything, lines up really pretty well. It looks like it's got a little bit of an issue here at the front, but it pushes down right there fairly easily. So if you're going to glue all that up, I think it'll be pretty straightforward, not much of a problem. Now, not so much, however, is the case with the upper cowling. You can see it doesn't fit too bad here on the left side. A little bit out of whack there towards the back by the air filter. But when you flip it around to the other side, things are pretty grim. You can see that there's a pretty bad misalignment here. And I'm not sure yet what the solution is going to be. I'm gonna tinker with it a little bit here off camera and see what I can figure out. But it may not even be that big of a deal, because if you're, like I would assume a lot of people are who are going to build this thing, you probably want to leave the upper cowling off so that everybody can see that beautiful engine. And so it may not be too big of a deal, but the main culprit is this right here. If you look at the front, you can see that the shape, the profile of the upper cowling is pretty well locked in, because it's got this former underneath it, which that's the shape. But you can see that the lower cowling sticks out quite a bit on either side of this tank. And I think that what's going on there is that it's because there's interference between this portion of it and the exhaust stacks, and that may just be a matter of doing a little bit of grinding, and I'm going to get to take a look at that pretty soon after I pull this lower section off, and I'm about to attempt to do that to test out my theory that it's possible to do that even with it glued up. Now, I would normally be pretty hesitant about doing something like this on camera, not only because I'm so clumsy and so slow, but because it just might not work. But hey, we're going to find out. We're going to do the acid test. I did want to note that I have not glued this section of the joint right here yet, and that's because it's so close to that underside of that tank that I'm afraid if I put any kind of glue in there that it'll glue it to the tank, and then it definitely will not want to come off. So first thing I'm going to do is prove to you that masking fluid works pretty good for temporary installation. Yeah, it's gross. It looks like someone sneezed all over your model, but all you got to do is get at it with some tweezers and just start pulling. See, there we go. It's kind of fun. That also is one reason why masking fluid is something that you got to use very carefully when you're actually masking paint, because as I have learned the hard way, that property right there, that stretchiness, can actually cause it to tear the paint that it's supposed to be masking. So anyway, that's a whole different story. Anyway, that's got enough of it off of there that it loosens this thing up, and there we go. Like butter, slides right off. So now that I have some idea of what I can do and how I can work with it, I can do a little bit more to diagnose what the issue is, between the exhaust stacks and the underside of this part right here, and maybe get a little bit tighter fit there with that. We'll see. There's, if you look inside right here, there's not a lot of material to work with. It's already pretty thin. So solving the problem may just be a matter of taking some off of this edge right here, where it won't show. So anyway, we'll see. That's next. I'll experiment with it, and I'll report back. So I have been kind of tinkering with this just slowly throughout the morning here, and I think I've learned something pretty good that at least confirms my theory earlier, that the problem is an interference between these lower cowling sections and the exhaust stacks. And here's why I think that, because as you can see, I decided to take a different approach. And this happened because when after I pulled this lower section off and started fiddling with it, I promptly broke the joint right here because there just was nothing there that was really giving it any strength. So I glued it back together, and rather than put it back on the engine block the way that it was, I thought, well, look, I'm going to just see if I can put all the cowling sections together and just match up the profiles, because that has to be correct. And then come back and see if I can get it to fit back on the engine block and, make whatever adjustments I have to. So that's what I've done here. You can see I've got all 4 of the engine cowling pieces put together, and there's not even any glue on this upper section. And you can see that they all match up pretty well. Pretty perfectly, in fact. It doesn't work so good here at the back, but that's because there's just no structure with this little piece that straddles the exhaust stacks. So no big deal there. Everywhere that's rigid and that has to match up in profile, all the way around here on the chin piece, and then up here on the upper cowling piece is pretty good. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to pop this upper piece off, which happens just like that, and I am going to go back and see if I can get this back on. Well, I'm gonna make some adjustments. I'm gonna take some material off of these exhaust stacks, and then I'm gonna see if this will go back on there and see how it looks. You'll also notice, I'm sure, that I've added a little piece of 20,000 styrene sheet here in the bottom. I felt like I had to do that to make it stout enough to be able to handle the handling. Okay, so it's a couple minutes later, and it's kind of a eureka little bit of a moment. I've discovered a couple of cool things. First, it looks like the fit crisis is resolved. Just compare the way that this cowling looks compared to how it did before. It's now conformed pretty well around this tank. So that's good news. That's what I was hoping to find out. And I'll show you what I did to help achieve that here in a second. The other thing that I think is kind of cool is the fact that this entire chin went on there with the lower cowling piece in place. You know, it's just held on here with some globs of liquid masking fluid, but that makes me think that it might make sense to just go ahead and glue this to the rest of that subassembly, because these upper pieces of the exhaust covers, whatever you want to call them, are free to flex, and that's kind of what allows this to all work. But let me just show you. If I can do it here. Of course, now that I've said so on camera, I won't be able to make it happen. There we go. Yep, see, it just kind of slides off towards the front. Now, here's what I did. Look at the profile of that lead exhaust stack right there. And you can see, hold on a second, let me go back to the tool drawer here. What I did is I just took this partly round diamond file and I took a little bit of a notch. You can see it right there at the tip of the file. And I did the same thing over here, because I think that's what was hitting on the inside of the exhaust covers right in there. So I think this has it resolved, and I think that is a good place to stop. Okay, so there you have it. That is episode 3 of the Dragon Bf-109-E-4 saga. And hopefully you found that constructive. It didn't go quite as smooth as I hoped it would, but you know, that's just part of the process, and sometimes you got to do just a little bit of mechanical problem solving to get these things to go together. So hopefully you guys found that interesting, maybe even entertaining, as I bumbled my way through it. And if you're building this kit, hopefully it'll be helpful for you. I have seen a few things online where other builders had trouble with that section of the cowling around the exhaust manifolds. So, you know, hopefully this is a good solution. I'm not claiming it's the only solution. I think it's a good one. I think it'll work for you, but obviously there's a bunch of different ways to skin any particular cat, including this one. So, you know, think outside the box. That's the main thing. Hopefully what I illustrated is the value of just taking a step back and looking at things a little bit differently, and you know, not being bound 100% by what you're shown on the instruction sheet, especially if the instruction sheet has some holes in it, like this one does. So, at any rate, the next episode will get us into some wings and maybe even some landing gear. I think after this anyway, what I hope is that everything will just basically be a downhill cruise to the finish. Alright, as always, if you're still watching, I appreciate it. Take care, much love.